rolling rumble, the smashing pins, the slick magicians, and the fiery competitors.
How about that for winning?
The sport is professional bowling, and these lords of the lane transform the game we grew up with into a spectacle of power, artistry, and fun. Names like Weber, Petraglia, Bone, Roth. These greats carry the torch which so many have held before. In St. Louis, Missouri, the International Bowling Museum and Hall of Fame stands as a shrine to the kings of the game, able sportsmen whose stories provide inspiration for one of America's favorite pastimes.
Right, baby, that's
right. From balls to bags, shirts to shoes, pins to perfect games. The International Bowling Museum and Hall of Fame here in St. Louis, Missouri celebrates all things bowling. Hi, I'm Parker Bone III. Growing up in Jersey in the 1970s, I had my own sense of what was cool. While my friends dreamed of hitting home runs like Hank Aaron, dancing like John Travolta, and dating girls like Cheryl Tiegs, I spent my weekends watching bowling on TV. Hey, I doubt Hammer and Hank could bowl a perfect game. When was the last time Travolta rolled an 800 series? And I'd like to see Cheryl Tiegs knock down a 7-10 split. Come to think of it, that I would like to see. Yeah, that's right. My heroes were bowlers. And my field of dreams were the local lanes of Howell, New Jersey. The guy I wanted to be, Mark Roth, who, by the way, is enshrined here in St. Louis. When this guy approached the line with that powerful wind-up, you actually had sympathy for the pins.
Mark Roth grew up a street-smart kid with a game to match his rough-and-tumble Brooklyn roots. His unique style was initially scoffed at by the bowling community, but it was Roth who would have the last laugh, as his reckless power approach produced 34 titles in a career that began in 1972. Though success would not come overnight.
I was living in Brooklyn in 1960-61. They were building a bowling center 2 blocks from my house, so during lunch, we'd go over and watch them build it, and when it finally opened, we went over, a bunch of our friends, and went bowling. Bowled a 58 my first game.
Much like that bowling center, Roth's career was a work in progress. After 4 years on the Pro Tour, Roth had yet to win a title.
Mark Roth left a mess of him.
In the beginning, Mark wasn't sure he was as good as he really was. So when Mark came on tour, he had that little bit of uncertainty. Am I good enough to be out here? Every time the situation arose, he just didn't make it over that hurdle.
In the 1970s, that hurdle was often Earl Anthony, whose mythical accuracy on the lanes made him the era's reigning king of bowling.
It's fairly typical that a man coming onto the tour struggles for a while. Mark was probably pretty typical in that way.
What wasn't typical about Mark was his style of bowling. An all-out reckless power game was the only way to describe it. At the time, no one had seen a bowler quite like Roth.
Mark Roth's power game completely changed the game of bowling.
Most of the successful bowlers, the Earl Anthonys, the Dick Webers, they were very systematic. It was a very smooth approach. It was a very smooth release. When people first saw Mark Roth on the lanes, it was nothing like that.
He came out and just put all kinds of revolutions on the ball, made the pins fly everywhere, and got you excited about watching it.
With my wrist in the ball, turning it and hitting it harder, you could tell the pins were crispy.
That may be the most powerful strike I have ever heard.
Every kid looked at that and said, I want to do that.
His approach, his movement from the beginning to the foul line, someone described as being like a cavalry charge. It seemed out of control, therefore probably not going to be very successful.
They said I wouldn't last long because my wrist would probably go out in 2 years. Well, they were wrong. I lasted 20-some-odd years.
Roth's hard-nosed game was an eye-opener to fans of the sport in the 1970s, and his untailored attitude perfectly complemented his revolutionary talent.
Some of the bowlers would go to a pro shop and they'd have all their different gadgets to measure and the weight balance and this and that. And Mark would go in and say, just drill me a ball. He'd drill a ball and he'd go out and throw it. Conditions didn't mean anything to him. He could go in a parking lot and bowl well.
His game was his personality. He was that kid from Brooklyn, and he was a very determined and very cocky and very confident kind of man.
Roth's belief in himself and in his unique power style began to pay dividends with his first tournament win in 1975. But it was in a 3-year period from 1977 to 79 when Roth exploded, winning 19 titles in that span. The now dominant Roth finally superseded Earl Anthony as the PBA's #1 star.
When Mark finally overcome Earl, that was amazing, because we didn't think anybody would take Earl off the record sheet.
In 1984, Roth eclipsed another Anthony mark, becoming the second player in bowling history to reach the $1 million winnings plateau.
Earl Anthony will forever be known as the $1 Million Man. Some thought that no one else would do that for quite some time. So when Mark breaks the $1 million mark, he sets himself apart.
It seemed Roth was always chasing a record first established by Anthony. But in 1980, this revolutionary bowler would do something that had never been done by Square Earl or any other bowler before or after. Stories from the Hall of Fame, bowling, will continue here on the History Channel. He's from the Hall of Fame, bowling, on the History Channel. Mark Roth was a true bowling legend, having revolutionized the sport with his high-octane power game. And in 1980, in front of a TV audience, Roth pulled off a feat that had never been accomplished on camera before.
It was Mel's South Shore Alameda Bowl in Alameda, California. It was 9th frame. I was bowling Bill Straub. I needed a mark in the 9th and 10th frame to advance to the next match.
He leaves 7-10.
And he leaves the crowd buzzing.
The 7-10 split is that impossible thing because there is simply no geometry that is going to allow you to cause one pin to knock over and hit the other, since they're the two back corner pins.
Roth is just going to go for one. The crowd can't believe it. First time ever, the 7-10 split. What a turnaround.
It was really a great thing to watch.
Here we have it, the one, the only, never before done on television. Kicks the 10 pin out of the back.
I think they were stunned. They went nuts. They were all standing and applauding. It was something they'd never seen before.
Mark Roth at that time was a very established star and didn't get too much publicity. He made the 7-10. He was on the evening news, the late news. So one shot, which basically was partially luck, gave Mark Roth more notice than when he won a tournament.
But in 1987, recognition came full circle for Roth as he was inducted into the Bowling Hall of Fame. Today, Mark Roth is revered as truly one of the greats ever to roll a ball down a lane.
Mark's lifetime average is 215.8 for over 15,000 games. And that is a phenomenal number.
Few people win 34 PBA tour stops. That alone says that he belongs in the Hall of Fame. Mark's name is, he revolutionized the game. What makes a Hall of Famer separate from a good bowler?
Roth's 7-10 split was magical, but the guy who routinely practiced the supernatural on the lanes was Andy Varipapa. Gaining worldwide recognition by knocking down intricate pin setups, Varipapa had more tricks up his sleeve than a shady CFO. And believe me, he inspired many other bowlers to attempt trick shots of our own. Here's one that Andy made famous. Hey, who oiled these lanes anyway? Excuses aside, these trick shots are even harder than they look, but somehow they were second nature to Andy Varipapa.
Andy Varipapa's link to the sport of bowling is everlasting. Born in Italy in 1891, Vera Papa sent his first ball rolling down the lanes of Brooklyn in 1904. Over most of the 20th century, Vera Papa starred as both a trick shot artist and winner of 17 pro tournaments. But his path to the Hall of Fame was illuminated by his one-of-a-kind personality.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to see you next week right here, okay?
Well, at these prices, I can't afford to stay away.
He doesn't look like a superstar. He doesn't sound like a superstar. He's just a nice man who seems to be proud of what he's doing and very pleased that you're pleased with it too.
He got it. Oh, there's the great Andy Vera Papa kick.
He had this engaging smile, outgoing personality. Everybody loved him. What made Andy such an interesting person is his self-confidence, so to speak. You know, Andy was positive that he was the best bowler that ever lived, and I'm not sure that he wasn't.
Joe, you're going to bowl the greatest bowler in the world. You know that?
I know that.
He knows it, too. He'll tell you. Andy Vera Papa, ladies and gentlemen.
No one could dispute Vera Papa's claims. Not when he was inventing and converting jaw-dropping, never-before-seen trick shots. It was his passion then and his legacy now.
He told me, you know, son, when you shoot a 250, some people might remember that in an exhibition. When you make a really good trick shot, it leaves a lasting effect on them forever.
He knew that for people to get into the sport of bowling, they were going to have to enjoy it. It's not just a question of throwing strikes. It's a question of giving them a show.
He began with the big four, the 4, 6, 7, 10. Andy had his own special technique for this shot. And he said he'd like to have the American Bowling Congress adopt it so we could all improve our averages. Then Andy showed us the Sunday driver, a fellow who drives all over the road, even on the left-hand side. Along comes a fellow in a hurry to make a bowling date and cuts off the Sunday driver at the crossing.
He did phenomenal things with a bowling ball, and to this day, I watch the shots that he made, and I don't know how he did it. I mean, I don't know how he was able to do the things that he did.
He hits 1, 2, 3. Then he showed us his carom shot. He hits the first pin on the right, the next on the left, and the last on the right again.
There's one shot that doesn't matter how many times I tried it, I can never make it. He could kick it down the lane and send it all the way out to the right gutter and make it come all the way back to the left gutter. It may not have been the best looking trick that he did, but I can never kick a ball and get it to go where I would like it to go.
Through the tunnel, watch the last pin.
I'm sure making these trick shots did not come second nature to him. I'm sure he spent hours and hours practicing them.
Andy seemed to be at the right place at the right time and really loved it. And so when Hollywood decided that with so many bowlers all over the country, they ought to do some shorts to put in the theaters all around the country.
Millions of Americans are rabid bowlers, and most of them think of Andy Vera Papa when they think of bowling perfection.
In the 30s, they shoot one called Strikes and Spares, and bang, the man is known throughout the country as the trick shot artist.
Not only was Vera Papa larger than life on the screen, but also in the eyes of those who followed in his path. Most pro bowlers today have a trick shot or two they've adopted from the Vera Papa arsenal.
One of Andy Vera Papa's famous shots was 2 balls and 2 hands making a 7-10. I have my own adaptation of that.
One of Andy's favorite shots was making the back road, the 7, 8, 9, 10. He always used to say, if anybody ever threw it slow enough to leave the back road, this is how they should make it.
While Vera Papa had gained stardom for his trickery on the lane, he craved more out of his career.
He always wanted to be known as a competitive bowler. He resented, they would call him the clown prince of bowling. He says, I'm not a clown. He says, I'm an artist who has perfected his shots.
But could this artist, now in his 50s, step away from the bowling sideshow and onto its legitimate stage? Stories from the Hall of Fame, Bowling, will continue on the Hall of Fame, Bowling, on the History Channel. The legendary Andy Varipapa is one of the Bowling Hall of Fame's most charismatic figures. His wide smile and gregarious nature endeared him to fans of the sport, and his incredible knack for converting trick shots garnered him worldwide acclaim. But as the decade of the 40s rolled around, Varipapa was feeling pigeonholed and wanted the respect earned by legitimate bowlers.
He's now very famous. He's been on a few newsreels in the 30s and the early 40s, and you don't do that without being rather skilled, but I think it took away from recognition. Today, I think of somebody like Robin Williams, who has been so well established as a wonderful, zany comedian that people have almost a hard time getting used to seeing him playing a very serious role. And so I think the same kind of thing happened with Andy.
In 1946, on a mission to prove his competitive legitimacy, Varipapa accomplished a feat as dynamic as one of his legendary trick shots.
He has a double. If Varipapa strikes, he will be the winner. Watch it. And he got it. Andy knows the result already.
Here's this 55-year-old man, and he wins the All-Star tournament in 46, which is the tournament.
Here's your $1,000.
And then comes back in 1947 and does it again. So suddenly, you realize that this man can compete at the national level.
Not a youngster, but he can throw it. Look at that. Beautiful.
At that time, the All-Star was 100 games in 7 days. And you're bowling against the best bowlers in the world. And he won back-to-back, and then the following year, he finished second. When they go look at the greatest achievements in sport, that wasn't listed in the top 100 is really annoying to me, because it would be like Jack Nicklaus at the age of 56 winning the U.S. Open back-to-back. And because bowling hasn't been looked at the way that it should as far as the sport goes over the years, that one wasn't even considered. But in the sport of bowling, I still consider that the best achievement ever.
But Varipapa wasn't through stunning bowling audiences as he continued to hit the lanes even into his 90s.
Practice makes perfect, and if you don't succeed in the first 30 or 40 years, stick to it. Something is bound to happen.
He probably is in the Hall of Fame first because he was, for the middle of the century, a man who really made a difference in making the general public aware of the game.
I take credit that I put the bowling business on the map.
People will tend to see the trick shots, but when you look at his record, he's a Hall of Famer on the lanes, not just a personality.
Let's give this great competitor a wonderful hand. Andy Varipapa.
Let me try it one more time. Now that I've got your attention, I'd like to take a moment to dispel the absurd notion that many bowlers are just out-of-shape beer guzzlers. I mean, sure, every alley has its own bar, and the sport once did feature teams sponsored by breweries, but what does that mean? Well, regardless, it should be noted that the best bowler of all time began his career on one of those sponsored teams. But Dick Weber hardly fit that lame stereotype. He was a slender athlete with superstar looks, and whether he was bowling for Budweiser or rolling solo, Dick Weber's career was always exhilarating.
In a career now in its 6th decade, Dick Weber has combined a gentlemanly demeanor with killer instincts on the lane to produce 26 national titles. Despite his role as the sport's worldwide ambassador, his bowling style always seemed to match his Midwestern humility.
My style is very simple. I'm what they call a stroker. Just roll the ball and let it do its action. I'm not fancy out there like some bowlers.
Dick probably had one of the best arm swings. You could always count on him where he'd bring the ball back a certain way and his arm swing would carry him.
He very smoothly and with not much extra movement just seemed to get to the ball and release it perfectly, and yet somehow it came out with the right spin and the right power, and the reaction when it got to the pins was wonderful.
People were afraid to bowl him, and especially if he needed a strike to win, because you could count 10 in the pit right there.
He can take the lead with a strike here.
tap.
Weber first started rolling strikes professionally as a member of the famous Budweiser team of the 1950s. At the time, bowling featured contests among beer-sponsored rivals, and this was an opportunity for Weber to pick up some spare change.
Dick was a mailman in Indianapolis, Indiana, who had become a very good bowler and was invited to join the Budweiser team, and he came to St. Louis as the young rookie. And he pretty quickly became the anchor man.
Here's a big one for Weber. He's got to have it. He's got it.
Joining the Budweiser team was a great education because they were great individuals to be with. They were great friends.
Weber led the Buds to championships and numerous entries into record books, including the highest team score in a 3-game series. But in 1962, the Buds disbanded as team-sponsored competition went flat. The face of bowling was about to change, and Hall of Famer Eddie Elias had a plan.
Eddie Elias decides that bowling and TV is ready for a more one-on-one competition. He approaches many of these top team players, the Don Carters, the Dick Webers, etc., and proposes the idea of forming a Professional Bowlers Association.
If you just joined us, you're watching the Professional Bowlers Tour live and in color from the Imperial Lanes in Toledo, Ohio.
Bowling wasn't really going to make it until we got on TV.
Welcome to the $100,000 World Series of Bowling.
And when Eddie Elias put together the PBA and the TV package, it changed everything.
One of the things you always worry about is you have to have a definable star. Well, here comes this fledgling show, and right out of the box, a very attractive, very cordial and friendly young man wins 2 tournaments in a row.
Championship bowling.
The star is established, and TV takes off from there.
The PBA's chosen young superstar backed up his image with some super play. Starting in the 1963 season, Weber scored high enough in 72 consecutive matches to cash in. Bowling's answer to Joe DiMaggio's hit streak.
For him to be able to cash in 72 tournaments is unbelievable. In each tournament, you have a set number of bowlers, and the cashing ratio is usually 1 for 3. So if you have 90 bowlers, 30 will get a check. That means 60 do not get a check.
And that's Tiger Woods. You know, that's as good as it gets.
Weber's success on the lanes and repeated exposure on TV quickly made him the most recognized face in bowling, attracting new followers to his game.
He's done a lot of work promoting the game all over the world. I think he was the first one to bowl in an airplane. And 747, they put a lane in, and he was bowling.
He is known all over the United States. He shows up on the Letterman show.
Dick Weber shooting at a television set.
The way that he relates to the public, the way he can relate his sport to the public is what makes it so special. You couldn't wait to meet him. You couldn't wait to follow him. You couldn't wait to root for him.
Dick Weber continues to play into his 70s, bowling competitively on the senior circuit. In January of 2002, 40 years after his television debut, Weber accomplished the unprecedented, something that would further cement his status as the sport's most shimmering superstar. Stories from the Hall of Fame, bowling on the History Channel. A star on the renowned Budweiser team of the 50s and a dominant factor in the early rise of the PBA, Dick Weber rose to the top of the game's elite. Success in the spotlight of the television era propelled Weber to superstar status, a label he sought to carry into the 21st century.
One of the most amazing feats is that the man remains a successful athlete over such a long period of time. To be successful at the top level, you have to be in shape, you have to be strong, and you have to be precise. And to do that over a period of 54 years is just phenomenal.
And it was in January of 2002 that Weber would accomplish a feat that would set a new standard for greatness and longevity. At a senior PBA regional in Taylorville, Illinois, Weber became the first bowler to win at least one tournament in 6 separate decades.
I'm very proud of my wins in 6 decades. But the thing of it is, the 6th decade, I won a senior regional title, and that really doesn't count. I haven't won a national title in the 6th decade.
I don't care if it's a senior regional, senior national, or our national tour or our regional. It's a PBA title in the year 2002 or 2001. Don't tell me it doesn't count.
Halls of Fame were built for performers like Dick Weber, and in 1975, he was inducted into bowling's Sacred Wings.
He won the World's Invitational 4 times. He was Bowler of the Year 3 times. He's got 26 PBA titles, about a half a dozen senior events. And he was truly the ambassador of the game. Really made people stand up and take notice and watch the game.
He's one of the greatest over a long period of time, and his name recognition, his appreciation by bowling fans is just the highest you're going to find in the sport.
Dick Weber fit perfectly in an era when the Pro Bowlers Association took pride in its conservative image. You would think Dick's son Pete would follow in those humble traditions. Think again.
Yeah, you like it! He ain't getting his first one against me, no way!
Pete Weber is one part bowler, one part pro wrestler. I would tell you what a great player he is if only PDW wasn't so eager to tell you himself.
Yeah, how about it? How about it?
With 28 career titles to complement his flamboyant style, Pete Weber has succeeded in making a name for himself.
PDW.
No small feat considering he shares a name with perhaps the greatest bowler of all time, his father, Dick Weber.
Dad would take us to the bowling center and set us down in front of the foul line and just kind of push the ball down the lane to see what we could do. By the time I was 4, I got the 6-pound ball. He taught me how to walk to the foul line. Make sure that you roll the ball and follow through. When you're ready, take off. A basic 5-step delivery. Very good, Pete. Very good.
Surprisingly, it was not his Hall of Fame dad that he looked up to on the lanes.
As a dad, I'm going to learn how to throw the ball like Mark Roth, and that's how I want to bowl.
We used to bowl at Dick Weber's house in St. Louis, and Petey was behind me every game. If I needed something to drink, he'd give me a Coke or coffee.
I did anything he asked me to do. That's how much in awe of him I was. His actions on the lane, his smacking the hands and vicious fists at the pins.
He's looking and saying, wow, that's really cool. I could do that. Rather than becoming a clone of his father, Pete tends to go more in that direction.
With the Weber blood running through his veins and the Roth technique flowing from his arm, Pete became a bowling prodigy. In 1970, at the age of 8, he bowled a .202, and by the time he was 12, he had captured his first perfect game. In 1979, at just 17 years of age, he dropped out of high school and joined the PBA Tour, a spotlight already occupied by his superstar father.
He has the terrible disadvantage, as soon as he gets on the tour, of realizing that however he performs, every reporter and every fan is going to compare what Pete Weber does to Dick Weber, the legend. And I think that's a very large burden.
I lived in a shadow for a long time, and it bothered me a little bit, but he gave me the best advice ever, and that was just be yourself.
He came out to change the name of Weber to Pete Weber, not Dick Weber's son. And he came out with a different attitude, much different than his father.
The way that Dick Weber was the classy individual on tour, Pete is the WWF guy. He's the one that everybody's going to watch because Pete's going to do something different.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
He's just so intense and so competitive that he just becomes this animal on the lanes. When he does one of these, that kind of cracks me up because he's like 5'10", 120, and there's not much of this there.
Going up and throwing the bowling ball and then walking back and sitting down with no emotions, well, who wants to watch that? That's no fun. Get a little emotional out there, smack your fist, look at your opponent, trash talk him a little bit.
Got Parker Bone to deal with, he's going down.
He has that killer instinct, which I love, because that's what you should have if you're going to be a champion.
I like to play to the crowd. They love to be part of it. Walking over and giving a high five to them. Hey man, Pete Weber gave me a high five, that's so cool. And then they just get into it that much more.
Pete is a personality on the lanes not to be denied. I think it's very energizing to crowds and pretty exciting TV.
Weber's exuberance on the lanes resulted in a 22% increase in bowling's 2001 television ratings, a boost the sagging sport desperately needed. While his attitude may raise more than a few eyebrows, Pete has succeeded in attracting a new generation of bowlers.
They saw, here's a guy who weighs 130 pounds. If he can be a star, hey, maybe that's the sport for me, because I can't play football, I can't play basketball, but I can bowl.
Most of the stuff that Pete does is good for the game. I think you need the animated figure, the guy that's excited. Then you can cross the line. A crotch chop, 10 o'clock at night was one thing. But when you know on Sunday afternoon that the little junior leaguers are also watching, this is inappropriate.
Love him or hate him, Pete had lived up to the Weber name.
The winner is Pete Weber.
By 1986, he had already won 9 national titles. But while he had been enjoying success on the lanes, he'd been relishing his time off them to excess.
Pete's had problems, you know, alcohol and other things.
I was a 24-year-old kid making $200,000 a year. Got introduced to some of the good stuff, and you know, just got into problems with it.
It's the inevitable maturing process. Here's a young man on the road week after week, simultaneously trying to grow up and also become a star in a sport that his legendary father has so well established the name Weber.
The drugs and alcohol, mixed with an already volatile temperament, produced an especially toxic result. Beginning in the mid-'80s, Pete spent over a decade in and out of rehab and suffered through a number of league-imposed suspensions. Once a lock for the Hall of Fame, Pete Weber's crumbling life threatened to derail the promising career that had once seemed his birthright. Stories from the Hall of Fame. Bowling, Hall of Fame. Bowling on the History Channel. Pete Weber's fist-pumping, trash-talking style produced 25 national titles by the turn of the century, one fewer than his father, Dick Weber. But Pete's battle with drugs and alcohol jeopardized his chances of surpassing his father's record and of landing in the Hall of Fame.
I went through the rehabs. I tried to straighten my act up a little bit as far as my temperament on the land.
I've been to several outings with him about drug and alcohol. They always preach tough love, and Juanita and I never could preach tough love to Pete. He's our lovable kid.
Took care of the problems, got back out on the tour.
I'm back, and I am PDW.
Since completing his last suspension in early 2001, Pete has regained his title as bowling's hottest TV draw.
How about that for winning?
But while television audiences were willing to look beyond Pete's troubled past, there was no guarantee the Hall of Fame would be as forgiving.
What the Hall of Fame should be about is superb performance in the sport. And to take that away, to not allow an extraordinary athlete to be recognized for any reason, including character, I think does a disservice to the Hall.
After being nominated by a small Hall of Fame committee, Pete received the required 2/3 vote from a group of over 200 sports writers and Hall of Fame members.
Dad called me after the Hall of Fame meeting and said, "You're going in." And I was like, all right. I mean, that was a pretty good high of life right there. It was just such a great feeling, especially to be the first father-son in the PBA Hall of Fame.
Pete would go on to surpass his dad in the record books and collect his 28th national title in 2002, raising the question, who's the better bowler, father or son?
He is.
Pete is. Pete's a better bowler, much better bowler.
His record speaks for itself. He's Dick Weber. What can I say?
He's in the Hall of Fame because of his record, because of his wins on the national tour, because of the excitement he brings to the game, and because he's my son.
While the debate goes on, one thing is certain. The Weber lineage forms a sturdy bridge between bowling's history and its future.
Okay, I'll admit, bowling might be slightly less glamorous than other professional sports. In lieu of chartered jets and swank hotels, we drive the family car and don't exactly stay at the Ritz. But you've got to admit, the game has its charm. I mean, what other sport provides a little fan to dry the sweat off your palms, which I'll tell you, comes in quite handy when you're just a few strikes away from a perfect game. Believe me, I've been there.
There have only been 11 perfect games on national television. Parker going for the 12th.
That's right, an even dozen if Parker bowled the third to pick this strike up.
Gotta hurry! It scores! He's done it! 300 game for Parker Bone!
The perfect game. 12 straight strikes for a 300 score. Accomplished by few, elusive to most.
Millions of bowlers bowl every year, yet only few ever reach perfection. So it's something that's very hard to do, and you know, it's something that everybody aspires to do.
One of the strengths of the sport, and probably one of the reasons why it continues to be so popular, is that magic 300 game is something that anyone could, at least once in their lifetime, achieve.
This is it for $10,000.
The mystique of a 300 is exactly the same mystique as pitching a no-hitter. It's much, much different than, say, a hole-in-one, because each frame, the tension builds. Each frame, you know what's in your head.
Gotta get that last strike. Gotta get it.
And more pressure builds with every shot.
Relax, Joe. Relax.
It's exciting, it's fun, and it's nerve-wracking. Because I still get nervous when I get 5 or 6 or 7 in a row.
Let's just take this last one in stride. Well, I got my 300 game.
I had 300s, which meant nothing. You might get $100 out of it, and you're shaking. Anybody that says they weren't nervous is lying.
A potential 300 game can cause any bowler to become hot under the collar. But the heat is really turned up when a perfect game is attempted on television. Additional prize money in varying amounts can add to a bowler's sweaty palms.
When you bowl a 300 game on TV, you get a bonus, and that can be a life changer.
On the next shot, if he can make it, $10,000 in a Ford Futura.
You don't know what the pressure is going to feel like when you finally get there.
I can feel it up here. I'm jittery.
If you knew how much pressure there was going to be, you would be able to handle it. I've been lucky. I had 2 shots on TV. The first time I'm thinking, my mother is at home watching this. My grandparents are sitting on the couch. My coach is sitting behind me. My father's in the stands. There's $10,000 in a new car. Please don't screw this up.
A 298. Standing ovation for John Petraglia.
16 years later, in 1994, Petraglia's second chance at televised perfection would stand to earn him $100,000, an even greater cause for butterflies.
John's been in this position one other time. He bowled a 298 on television. He said, I will never shoot a 298 again. $100,000 bonus if he strikes on this ball.
My kids were 9 and 3 years old at that time. I had this anvil on my head. How am I going to pay for college? And as I was getting up for the last shot, it was one more shot to college, $100,000. I stick it in a trust fund. By the time they're getting ready to go to college, they can get this done in one shot.
Here we go.
There it is. $100,000.
College is taken care of. I'm so happy. All the phones were ringing after the show was over. They had 5 lines in the bowling center, and they were all going. And then the person behind the desk said, "Number 4 is the White House." And I said, "No, it isn't." And they said, "Oh, yes, it is." And I said, "Listen," I says, "Bill Clinton isn't back there watching the PBA tour," and immediately got on the phone before we even went off the air and said, "This is a prank call, just hang it up." So the person behind the desk went to hang it up, and they said they insist that this is the White House and you get on the phone. So I pick up the phone, and I says, "Hi, this is Johnny Petraglia." And the guy on the other end says, "Hi, this is Joe Cirillo, and I own the White House Tavern in Chicago." And he says, "And you don't know me from Adam, but the entire bar is going nuts." And I'll tell you what, that was better than getting a call from the White House. It's something I'll never forget.
One professional bowler who cannot be forgotten when discussing the 300 game is PBA Tour veteran Bob Learn.
I was the first person to break the record that was long-standing by Alvin Metzger with 29 300s. Back in '86, I went by that record, and ever since then, I've been nicknamed Mr. 300.
In 1996, Learn found himself in position to complete his dream 300, a perfect game in front of his hometown crowd.
Pandemonium here in Erie Civic Center.
He's from Erie, Pennsylvania. He has been their hero for tons of years, and he gets pepped up whenever he bowls in Erie.
The whole day was surreal. I mean, I was living a dream out, bowling at home. Civic Center was full. Only 7,000 people could fit in there. I'm sure there would have been more if there was more capacity.
Sometimes the 300 game produces pressures that must be just astronomical. A good example is when Bob Learn finds himself on TV. There's a $100,000 bonus as well as victory riding on his next few shots, and he happens to be in front of a sympathetic and supportive home crowd. In that kind of context, I think a 300 game is impossible.
The opening match was against a Hall of Famer, Johnny Petraglia. We had a big match going. He actually had a 279 game against me.
Oh, the 49-year-old has really turned the screw. 279.
I had to go up in the 10th. I had to throw the first one just to win the match.
Wow, we need only 2 more, ladies and gentlemen.
That's when I really started thinking about throwing a perfect game.
One more. $100,000. This is something that no matter how long you practice, you can't practice for this.
So I got up there with 1 shot to go, thinking, don't screw up. Everybody's watching. Got everybody here.
He has just made his 52nd 300 perfect game, but this by far the most valuable. 100,000, ladies and gentlemen.
What do you have to say?
My hometown, Erie, PA, 300 on TV. What can I say?
While close to 80 career perfect games is no doubt an awesome feat, it's yet to gain Learn induction into the Bowling Hall of Fame.
I definitely think it's my ticket to getting into the Hall of Fame, having the most perfect games in the world for 15 years or so now.
While Learn will have to wait for his Hall of Fame induction, each year scores of everyday bowlers earn their place in bowling's hallowed halls.
Our Bowling Hall of Fame is unique in a number of ways, but probably the most important one is that besides recognizing the greatest bowlers of all time, it also has a major exhibit called Hometown Heroics, designed to recognize those people who may never dream of becoming a superstar, but who bowled a 300 game once in their life. So when you come here, you can not only find out the stories of Dick Weber and Pete Weber and Andy Verapapa and Mark Roth, you can also look in the computer and discover that Susie down the street, just like she said she would be, is in the International Hall of Fame for her 300 game that she bowled 10 years ago. And that's pretty exciting, and it's definitely unique.
Now you tell me, what other sport includes the everyday recreational league player in its Hall of Fame? You never know. You too may one day find yourself honored here. And that's the beauty of bowling. It's the people's game, a slice of Americana we all share and love. Well, I certainly hope our time together has expanded your perception of professional bowling. Perhaps we finally laid to rest the image of a bowler whose weight rivals his scoring average. And in the process, open your eyes to the power of Roth, the artistry of Verapapa, and the craftsmanship of the Webers. These are the greats of bowling. Their legends are established on the lanes and preserved in their stories from the Hall of Fame.
They speed along 2 coffin lengths behind each other.
We gotta form a club.
Got lots of nerve, lots of pizzazz.
What do you want to call it? And he said, we're angels from hell.
We don't want nobody pushing us around.
They're an arrogant, ingrown, close-knit brotherhood.
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man.
To hell with tomorrow. Their bag is today. Their bag is right now. This minute, what's happening?
We want to get loaded.
Outlaw biker gangs. Sunday on the History Channel.